is Sergio Gusmeroli from Politecnico Milano, and I've been invited here to speak about digital manufacturing, which is a quite broad subject, and so I decided to focus with to one specific aspect, which is data spaces, and which is getting more and more emphasis and visibility in the last discussions in the digital manufacturing ecosystem. I used here the slides from the Big Data Value Association because I'm co-chairing the working group about the smart manufacturing industry in Big Data Value Association. I think you should know what Big Data Value Association is, but anyway, you could go to the website of this association, which is collecting several projects in Horizon 2020, and then through the new partnership, which is AI data and robotics, also in Horizon Europe program. I just tried not to give a definition, but at least to share with you what we mean by a data space, because nothing to do with the space industry, but it is basically an evolution of what we called since several years data lakes, data vaults, data repository, and all this stuff. So now the point is, first of all, distribution. That is highly distributed architectures and highly distributed data repository. So the concept behind the data space is that we don't have all the data concentrated in one single physical data center or data lake, but we have a highly distributed ecosystem of smaller, of course, data repositories, which are going to follow, for instance, the product lifetime, including maintenance, refurbishment, maintenance, but also circularity and recycling, and which could also follow the value chain, the supply chain of the different components. And this is something that it is very important in the sense that as soon as we have a very distributed data space, then the most important aspect that you should consider is data sharing. That is how to make this data available also to other organizations, to other legal entities which are interested to access those data. And this is the motivation which comes from the communication of European Commission of 2020, which is called European Strategy for Data. And in the European Strategy for Data, there is some sort of definition of a European data space with the three main pillars. Pillar number one is that highly distributed data, pools of data, as I said, but fair. What does it mean fair? Fair means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And so the point is that in order to allow the development of advanced applications, they should be able to interoperate different data spaces which are located in different countries, in different organizations, in different stakeholders. And in order to do that, we need to adopt FAIR principles, which means that we should, for instance, describe those data with open standard metadata. We should use the common ontologies in order to fill the semantic interoperability gaps. And we should use, of course, standard data formats and standard data protocols in order to allow this interoperability. And this is the pillar number one of a data space, which is about data science, which is about the data. The second pillar is about hardware and software infrastructure. It is not enough to have those fair data repositories, but we also need a hardware software infrastructure which is able to process, analyze, and exchange the data between the different locations. And this is the main focus, for instance, of an association that you see in the top right of the slide, which is International Data Spaces Association, where Politecnico di Milano is also member of the Italian hub and of the international association. Number three, so first of all, data. Second, hardware software infrastructure. And third, we need to define the access and usage rights in the ecosystem in order to find appropriate business models and governance models and mechanisms to govern the ecosystem. Basically, we have data providers and we have data consumers. And the data providers should put in place their data sovereignty right. What do we mean by data sovereignty? We need the right to define who has access to the data and who can use the data according to different models. And this is the most important aspect of research in the data space concept. That is how to define these models, these contractual agreements, which will allow data providers, also competitors, maybe in the same ecosystem, and data consumers to exchange data by respecting privacy, confidentiality, and data sovereignty. There are several approaches which have been recently developed in order to solve this problem. One is the approach of the Big Data Value Association, as I said. And so there are some documents. I put here one document which is which has been delivered more or less one year ago. And it is called Towards a European Governed Data Sharing Space. What does it mean? It means that in this paper, we should also insert European values, European policies, especially regarding privacy, confidentiality, that should be considered when building a European data space. And which are the different aspects of a European data space? It is not just technology, but it is, of course, data, as I said, and governance, but also people and organizations. And so we need really to create a new mindset for people and new processes in the organizations, which will allow the implementation of these data spaces and of these data sharing spaces. Of course, at the center of it, there is trust. So we need to establish a trust mechanism among the different stakeholders, among the different actors, which are based on models in order to maximize the value of data spaces and data sharing spaces. A second organization which is very active in this domain is the International Data Spaces Association. And in particular, in the OpenDI project, I'm the technical coordinator of, they published these design principles for data spaces. So the point here is mostly on the offer side. That is, which are the design principles in order to build effective and efficient data spaces. And so in this document, we have analyzed different design principles. As you see here, data sovereignty, decentralized software infrastructure, data level playing field, and public-private governance. And we have given some sort of handbook for those who want to develop a data space. And this is very valid also for aeronautics, for the domain of Dominio, because data are usually very distributed and owned by different stakeholders, by different companies along the lifetime of components and the aircraft itself, which is quite a long lifetime. But from the demand side, so which is the situation of industrial manufacturing company with respect to data spaces and to make and to take decisions on the basis of data and not on the basis of knowledge and experience of people, of experts. And you can see here that industrial manufacturing is quite lagging behind with respect to other industries in taking decisions on the basis of data. I think that your experience about banking, insurance, telecom, and so on is a daily experience. And so now you could, these industries take their decisions on the basis of data. And if you go to a bank to open a new account or to make an investment, the guy or the lady there will consult an online tool. And so, and they cannot go beyond the decisions and the suggestions that these online tools are proposing. And this is quite state of the art in banking, in insurance, in the telecom. If you want to make a new contract with the telecom operator, everything is based on decision support systems based on data. In the industrial manufacturing is not so developed this, and why? There was a study from the Commission which was delivered in 2018 about which are the barriers for companies, for manufacturing companies to share the data. And 52% of the 1,000 companies of the study felt that they face obstacles. So they really do face obstacles in data sharing, and those obstacles are mostly technological, technical, legal, and skills. And so the lack of skills, the lack of business processes and adequate personnel in order to implement this. From the data reuse, so for those companies who want to reuse data, again, 59% of the companies face obstacles in that. And basically, the point is that there is no market. So there is no market of data. And so there is access denial, there are unfair conditions and high cost. So the owner of the data imposes some very strong conditions in order to get access to those data. And we need to make this situation better. Inside the Connected Factories project, the Connected Factories is a project of the factories of the future. And Politecnico di Milano is again one of the beneficiaries. we have developed this data space pathway where we have 5 levels of maturity, of readiness of a company in order to be able to implement a data space and to share the data. It is not that a company should decide out of the blue to implement a data space and to share data. There are several steps that they need to follow, and these steps have been modeled in these 5 levels. That is no data control, data silos, data bridges, data interoperability, and data valorization, where the last 2 levels are really very important also for the aeronautic industry. That is, first of all, we need data interoperability, but also data valorization, which means that the companies should really know and valorize the data that they are putting in the data space and the data that they are willing to share. How to share and which are the business models for private sector data. Again, there is a communication of the Commission in 2018, which identifies 3 main models for B2B data exchange for the private sector. Let's start from the third, the C, data exchange in a closed platform. And this is the case of many industries, I think also in the aeronautics. And so it is not open to all. It is something that it is usually governed by a large enterprise, by a large company, but sometimes it is also based on an SME ecosystem, not hierarchical and in a peer-to-peer way. And this is the most common scenario for many manufacturing industries, including aeronautics. Then you have the other extreme, which is the model A, open data. I know that our manufacturing industry is not so much accustomed to contribute to the open data approach, but this is something that it has to be improved, which means that there are now techniques for data anonymization, data pseudonymization, and then there are business models which are towards open innovation, living labs. And so the availability of data for experimenters, for innovators, for artificial intelligence innovators is quite relevant. And it is quite important also for the big companies in aeronautics. And I had experience, a direct experience in AgustaWestland helicopters, which is now Leonardo helicopters. And they are quite sensitive of that, that is to create an ecosystem of innovators. So they cannot innovate just by themselves, but they need to open up their borders to innovators. And this means also to create some data sets which could be open, not open to all, of course, but open to a community of innovators. The point number B is how to implement a data economy in the manufacturing industry. And this is maybe less advanced, but it is quite important to valorize the data that we are sharing, especially in a service economy, in servitization, which means that you have the owners of the data, which are usually in the hands of the manufacturers, and then you have some service companies that are involved in the provision of the services associated to it. And this is something that it is also very interesting to consider. From the Commission viewpoint, I think many of you know that there is the Digital Europe program now in place. The work program has been released last week. And inside this program, there is one action which is called manufacturing data spaces. And this is something that many aeronautics companies could apply, and some verticals in the aeronautics could be quite appreciated and quite good to be implemented. Both in the scenario number one, which is the value chain, the supply chain, and the scenario number two, which is inside the production plant, inside a production line. We made this mapping by using the EFRA classification of three main grand scenarios: smart autonomous factories, which means the production; product service factories, that is products associated with services; and then hyper-connected factories, which is the supply chain. And we put it in relationship with the three business models: open data, data marketplace, and trusted data networks. And in this scenario, we have identified some projects which developed data spaces already, embryonic data spaces, as they say. Two of them I selected because they are relevant for the aeronautic industry. This is a project which is called FASEN. It is a Euro-Brazil project, and you see here an application in an Embraer plant. You have a drilling robot to make holes in a wing of an aircraft, and we put some additional sensors, vibration sensors, in order to improve, to monitor.
Excuse me, we have 2 more minutes, please, Sergio. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Yes, I started at 42. Okay. And okay, and this is an application of an IoT data space, so an Internet of Things data space, and we used a framework which is called FiWare, which is an open source framework for industrial IoT. Another case is a data space for virtual reality and augmented reality applications. And this has been done in a project which is called Quality, and it is about, of course, the quality of the process and the quality of the product. Number one, you have a virtual reality application for training of maintenance people, where you could put here scenarios which in the reality usually do not happen. And then you have an augmented reality instruction for operators on the field, where they could really follow some instruction from the experts on how to perform some maintenance operations. And that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available to receive your questions.
Thanks a lot, Sergio. Unfortunately, I will have to ask to the audience to place all the questions in the chat so that we can elaborate with a lot of time later, because now it's a bit tight on schedule. All right, thanks a lot, Sergio.